Ladies and gentlemen, it is 7 o'clock on Monday, and it is time for Monday Night Nerd. Thank you all for joining us tonight live. Hope you guys had a good day, and if you're watching this post time, I hope you guys had a great day either way. My name is Myers Corp Creations, real name Mike Myers. That is my real name. And I am so glad you're here to check out tonight's episode of Monday Night Nerd. We got a lot to talk about, so I will not take up too much of your time at this intro. We got to talk about the way Ant-Man's looking right now. We're going to talk about a few reviews that for movies I watched this weekend. We're going to talk about the new TMNT trailer. We're going to talk a little sadly about some thanks in the memories. And then our main event, we're going to be talking about 90s comics because this is 90s month. We are going to be doing 90s content all month. Go into the rest of my live streams that are prepared for later on this month. We're going to be talking about 90s wrestling, 90s music, 90s everything. This month is 90s month here on the channel. So again, thank you all for joining. 90s Comics Month. I am repping the Spawn t-shirt. Biggest I think still one of the biggest selling comics, African American lead in a comic. Some record like that. One of my favorite comics, big fan. So we're definitely gonna be talking about Spawn. We're gonna be talking about Death of Superman later. We're gonna be talking about those foil covers and the variant covers and all those weird things that came out in the 90s when the comic boom happened and how they were gonna make millions of dollars for everybody. And unfortunately, they didn't. And I've got some experience. Well, I don't have some experience myself, but I know people who did. And I somehow was able to arrive with a giant collection of all these variant covers and stuff. We'll talk more about that later. But let's start in right now with the news. If you checked out my post from earlier this week, I didn't really have a lot of news, so it wasn't at the weekend yet. And man, the weekend picked up some news, and especially today. Mandalorian. I'll be completely honest here. I was just going to do a quick thing about Mandalorian because I have not seen Mandalorian, and that does not mean I've not seen season 3. That means I've not seen any of the Mandalorian. I know. I am a Star Wars fan. Believe me, I am a Star Wars fan. I'm just not a TV guy. There's very few shows that I will sit and watch the whole thing. And if I do, I'm definitely not a binger. I am not somebody who will sit there and binge continuous episodes over and over and over again. That is not for me. So when it came to Mandalorian season 3, I saw so much hype for the days before that, before the debut episode came out. And then I didn't hear anything. And that kind of shocked me because for how much hype the first season had with I do know a little bit of the spoilers of what happened and how much hype the second season got and how much Boba Fett got and how much going into season 3 there was a lot of talk about what they were going to do with it, especially coming off how good Boba Fett was. And the debut episode came out and then I didn't hear anything. There was no yay, there was no nay, there was nothing. So I just wanted I don't know. It just kind of shocked me as a nerd because I haven't heard anything from anybody on how the season is going. I know Disney does episode by episode, so it's not like somebody could binge the whole season in one shot, but I figured off the first episode we would have heard some. I would have predominantly heard all my Star Wars fans going, "It's amazing, you have to watch it," or "It's terrible." And nothing. I haven't heard anything. So that just that was a little point that I wanted to bring up, that it's kind of shocked me that nobody's really said anything about the season. But who knows? Maybe the first couple episodes of the first episode was just kind of meh, and everyone's just kind of waiting for the rest of them. Ant-Man. Let's jump into Ant-Man for a second. A couple episodes ago, I saw Ant-Man. I gave you my review. I thought it was a fine movie. I don't think it's, the creme de la creme of the Marvel universe. I completely agree with that. But I really don't think it's getting the hate that it deserves. And that hate is to the point where people are saying it's just as bad as Eternals. Now, I think we can all say, or the most part, I shouldn't say that because I was on another podcast, the Geeks and Co podcast, and I made the assumption that everybody hated that the Eternals movie, but they pointed out they were big fans of that movie. So that kind of shocked me that there actually are some Eternal fans out there. It wasn't for me. And I will admit I am very easily impressed by these Marvel movies and movies in general and any entertainment. But The Eternals movie just did not do it for me. It seemed very slow. Um, I think I think I've heard people say it's the most DC Marvel movie that's ever been released, and I kind of see their point of it, where it's very dialogue heavy and not a lot of action. But I've seen a bunch of reports saying that Ant-Man, based on, I think it's revenue and reception based off the Rotten Tomatoes reviews, that it's just as bad as Eternals. And I'm just kind of stunned by that. Again, it's not the greatest movie. 100%. It is not the greatest movie ever made, but it's kind of surprising that it's that bad. Like I remember sitting in the theater with a couple of my buddies, Sean and Dave and Thomas, and we were sitting there going, I think that the 3 Ant-Man movies are probably 3 of the steadiest movies in the Marvel Universe based off the same hero. We haven't had Guardians of the Galaxy 3, so that's obviously probably going to be the top. But, Captain America had its 2, if you wanna count Civil War as a 3rd, and there's some peaks and valleys in that. I'll fully admit that, even though I'm a big Cap fan. But I was like, the Ant-Man series, if you told me many years ago that Ant-Man would have 3 pretty good movies, I wouldn't have believed you. But I was pretty happy with Ant-Man 3, especially bringing in Kang and how great of a role that was. So it kinda shocks me that it's getting such a bad reception, especially with how much they pushed the Kang character. But again, it's Marvel, and this is what I say to most people when they say, "Oh, I didn't like this character. I didn't like this movie." It's the same thing as Kevin Smith says, "Give it 5 minutes, you'll get another one." So if you don't like this Marvel movie, give it 5 minutes, you'll get a new series, you'll get a new movie, you'll get new everything. So just if it's not for you, I completely understand. And actually, to back that up, this is something I've said to people before that, especially this time of the Phase 4, Phase 5 era, a lot of people are just comparing it to Phase 1, Phase 2, Phase 3, and going into the Infinity War saga with Thanos. A lot of people came out of that and said, well, it's not as good as it used to be. It's not as good as it used to be. And I said, agreed, 100%. But I think with those movies leading up to the Infinity War saga, you really had a series that was geared towards one audience, and that was me and the people who grew up with this, grew up with the IP of Marvel and comics, and now we're finally seeing these things represented well on the big screen. Now they're going to the next generation. And that's where I don't understand the hate for things like She-Hulk, Miss Marvel, stuff like that, because the Miss Marvel show was not geared towards me. I personally liked it, but I can take my head out of that fandom that I have and go, who is this geared for? This is geared towards little girls who might be interested in a character that represents them. Same with She-Hulk. I know She-Hulk wasn't meant for me. It's for a female audience because it definitely had a more sitcom feel to it, especially with the ending. And that's fine. That's not geared towards me. But I don't feel like I should bash that because it's not for me. It's geared for the next generation or someone who's not me to bring them into it. So, I think the hate that comes from Ant-Man and She-Hulk, Miss Marvel, and all, even I've seen some people not too pleased with Moon Knight, and that stuns me too. Like, I wasn't a big fan of Moon Knight personally. I thought it was a great character, but I just thought it dragged. But I know a lot of people who are like, "This is the greatest," but I also know a lot of people who hate it. So it's a weird world we live in right now with the MCU, and I see a lot of people saying like, "Oh, this is the end of the MCU." Man, they've got so much bank on that entire Marvel IP that they've got so many things they could do with it. They are not in any trouble. And remember, they've got Disney. So if they do get into trouble, they'll put it on pause and they'll bring it back in 10 years or 5 years and they'll make bank again because we'll all have that nostalgia bug for it. So if it's not for you, no hard feelings. I completely understand why it's not for you, but I'm still excited. I'm excited for Guardians 3. This is going to be, I think this is going to be another knockout of the park, especially with James Gunn directing it. So I don't see Marvel going anytime soon. So yeah, I liked Ant-Man. Let's end it with that. I liked Ant-Man. All right, now we're going to talk about a couple reviews because man, did I watch some movies this weekend. Had some free time. Little drinky there. I had some time to watch some movies. It's weird because usually I don't watch a ton of movies. I usually end up going to the theater, but I'm trying to watch some more at home so I can try and get through some movies that I haven't seen yet. And one of them that I saw this weekend was The Whale with Brendan Fraser. And when I say that man deserves an Oscar, that man deserves an Oscar. That movie was incredible. And it was very interesting to see the way they shot it, where it is very much a one set shoot. And it really, I noticed it about halfway through where I went, wow, we're not really leaving this apartment of Brendan Fraser's character. And it wasn't until the end where it said based off a play. And I went, that's where it is, because I do have a theater background. I did theater in high school. So I understand shooting a theater production and only having really one set to work with. So that really did catch my eye. But the performance that he brings and even the story, like just the story of his addiction and the way it grips him in all of his fears is just incredible. The performance is just, and even the side characters that come in, there's about 3 or 4 little side characters that make appearances and visit him. And overall, it's amazing. Like there is so much little nuances that he does with the emotion that he brings in without even, and it's not even sad emotion. And when that's what I mean when I use the word emotion. I don't mean just sad. I mean happy when when he gets moments with his daughter that you can just tell it crushes him, but also because he knows he doesn't have many of them, but it makes him so happy that he's building them right now. And yeah, that was a great movie, and I will fully admit I was yeah, I'll admit I was crying by the end because that ending was just amazing. So highly, highly recommend it. If he doesn't win, I think that's a travesty. He's won everything so far, and if he doesn't cap it off with that, I'm going to be very surprised, and I think the Oscars will be doing a very big disservice to themselves if they don't give him the win. And I know it's all independently voted and la 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 la, but I think to bring in the viewers for the show and make them end on a high note, possibly want to watch again next year, he should end up with the trophy. So overall, go see it. It's out on digital, I believe. So go see it. It's amazing, 100%. The other movie I saw was one I had heard about a while ago, and some podcast I watched said it, and they said this is a 3-hour movie. It's something you would not expect to enjoy as much as you do, but you will. So check it out and stick through it. And that movie was RRR, and it's on Netflix. It is a Bollywood action movie. And when I say it was a fun time, it was a fun time. Not going to spoil too much of it, but it's basically the British monarchy is invading part of India. The Indian There's a group of Indians that live in I want to say in a jungle, and they kidnap a member of the tribe, and they take him back to the British monarchy, and they get their champion of India, and he takes on the British monarchy. But there's an Indian who lives with the British monarchy, and you find out something about him, and they collide on multiple occasions. It is a fun movie. It is 3 hours, and I did stop for a little while and came back in the next day to watch the second half. I think I got about halfway through it. But the action is good. I Even just with the subtitles, like it was a fun time. The story was good. And this is one of the few movies that I really liked because it kind of had a Lord of the Rings problem of, and I use problem, but they have a solution for it, where it could end and you would have been satisfied, but it doesn't, and the story keeps going. And there was a part of after I came back from the halfway point, it was probably about half and a little bit where it could have ended and I would have been happy. But they bring it up again, and you have a split second because you've done this before with other movies where you're like, oh no. But it gets you and it holds you and it makes you go, oh, I do want to see how this works out. I want to see more of this. And then it has a little bit of a lull where you think, okay, it's going to end. And then it brings you back into the story again. And you kind of have that again, a moment like, oh no, like we could have just ended it there and I would have been satisfied. And then you get started on that next part and you're like, oh no, this got even better. And yeah, go watch it. If it does have a little bit of it, it is a Bollywood movie, so there is a few dance sequences, traditional, stereotypical Bollywood action movie, but it's done in a way that works very well. And there are many songs, but overall, it is a stellar movie. Go check it out. If you love action, it's got some cool action scenes with a guy literally beating up has to be 1,000 people in a convincing way. That's another thing I want to point out. The fight scenes in that movie, you do have to put your mind and your logic at the side because there are some parts where you kind of go, okay, that's a little hard to believe. But man, the way that they've designed it is you kind of go, oh, I could see that working in, again, a stretch, but you could see it working. So yeah, go check out RRR on Netflix. It's a very, very good time. What does we got a couple comments here. We've got Fan and Frontier Eternals equal moose balls. Yeah, that's not the I've heard worse. Ant-Man 3 equals Star Wars Rick and Morty. You know what? Kind of. Also, to go back to the Ant-Man, I saw a screenshot from somebody who showed what looked like a sentient version of the Infinity Stones, because in Endgame, just before spoilers, Thor kills Thanos at the beginning. Thanos says the stones are destroyed, they're broken up into atoms. And then someone, again, I can't say if this is true or not, but someone took a screenshot and it looks like it's from a group of the characters in Ant-Man 3, and it looks like they all have heads and they're the Infinity Stones. So I gotta watch Ant-Man 3 again and see if that's in there, because if that's what happened to the stones, that's interesting. And that could be an interesting thread that they could pull on later. So again, don't know if that's what happened or if that's the truth, but that's something I saw today. We have Groot in London. Hey, buddy, how's it going? Glad you could stop in. Glad you hope you're enjoying the show. Groot in London. Go check him out on Instagram. He's got some amazing cosplays, and I think he's working on something big for I think it was TCC coming up week and a half, 2 weeks. So thanks for joining, buddy. All right, TMNT trailer. Man, that was cool. If you haven't checked it out, go online after you're done this show and check out the TMNT trailer. There's a new animated Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie coming out, I believe, in the summer, and it looks really cool. It has got a hand-drawn style similar to Spider-Verse a little bit, I guess you'd call it. I think it's more of a painting look than a digital comic look, which I see the similarities, and I've seen a lot of people mention it, but I still think it's a different style. But the one thing they do differently is all of the turtles act like teenagers and are voiced by actual teenagers, which I kind of like. It is definitely a different take. They have, it's a different generation than when I grew up. So again, it's going to be a little different than what I would go, well, that's not what I did as a teenager. But the way they're voiced and the way they're animated and the way they act, I think it's a really good job. The cast looks amazing. John Cena's in it and a whole bunch of other people. I'm interested in this. When I first heard there was a new TMNT, I gotta admit I was a little I was a little hesitant about it because we had the TMNT animated movie recently. We've had the Michael Bay ones, which let's just kind of keep those to the side. But this animated version's interesting. I'm really interested to see more of this movie, and if I think they got a good I think they got a good idea. I think with the amount of time and effort that's put into this animation, I think they have to have a good enough script to put that much time into it. So good for them. I'm interested in seeing how this is gonna go. Hey, we got the Geeks and Co guys in the house. Thank you guys for joining. I'm having a blast tonight, and I hope you guys are too. Check out Geeks and Co on YouTube. They have a podcast every Thursday. They do a bang up show. I have seen that. I've been on their show once. They have guests every single week, and they've got other stuff they're talking about. I think they're talking about Picard. They're talking about a whole bunch of stuff. So Geeks and Co, thanks for coming in here. And we got J.S. Bellinger in here. How's it going, buddy? I'm glad you could stop by as well. Now we have to hop into a sponsor. Every week we have a sponsor here. We have to have a sponsor to keep the lights on. And as always, the number one sponsor here on the podcast is my beautiful wife. My wife will always be the number one sponsor because without her, I would not be here doing this. I would not have this beautiful home that we both helped build. I wouldn't be here without her. So my wife will always be number one. I love you. Thank you for always sponsoring me and always believing that I could do this. So I love you. Thank you. The second sponsor for tonight is my parents. I really got to do a shout out to my mom and dad. If, I've been watching a lot of videos recently about, enjoy what you have and yada, yada, yada. If it wasn't for that magical night, I wouldn't be here. And thank you to my mom and dad for everything they've done to make me the charming young lad that I am right now, and always pushing me to try whatever I feel like. So, Mom, Dad, love you. Thank you for always having my back. All right, now we have to talk about the sad things. We have to do thanks for the memories. It's a segment that thankfully we had to skip last week because we didn't have anybody, but unfortunately we have one this week. And that is Tom Sizemore. Unfortunately, Tom Sizemore, who you probably will know from Black Hawk Down, Saving Private Ryan, an amazing actor, passed away this week at the age of 61, I believe, due to a brain aneurysm. Like I said, I know him most from Saving Private Ryan and Black Hawk Down. He's been in several other movies. You can check his IMDb. You've probably seen him sooner or later in some production. What people don't realize is he plays a very famous voice if you're a video game person. He is Sonny from GTA Vice City. He is one of the villains in GTA Vice City, and he was an incredible character and an incredible voice and an incredible actor. So thank you, Tom, for everything you did for this world of entertainment. Cheers. We will miss you, and thank you for the memories. All right, let's go to the main event. All right, let's talk about 90s comics. Like I said, I'm rocking the Spawn shirt tonight. I'm a kid of the 90s. I grew up, I was born in 1988, so I had a little bit of the 80s in me, but then most of my childhood was in the 90s. And like most kids, comics was kind of like is now where it's a religion. That was growing up having Spider-Man and X-Men and all these amazing comics just shaped you as a child. Spider-Man, X-Men, Batman, Superman. We had so many cool things, and it was really the boom of the comic book industry. It was doing fairly well in the early 90s, 90, 91, but it wasn't till about 92, I believe. And that's when probably the biggest event in comic history happened, and that was the death of Superman. The death of Superman was on mainstream news. That's how big that was. People were lining up for miles trying to get a copy of that black cover to it, or a black packaging to it, and inside held the moment where Superman fought Doomsday and didn't make it. And it was a heartbreaking moment, and everyone thought that that was going to change the comic industry, and it did, but not in the way that everyone really thought. That book was huge. Like I said, around the block for all the comic book stores. It was on mainstream news, and everyone thought that comics were now going to be a currency. And this is where we jump into where we sort of jumped the shark. You know what? Jump the shark's the wrong term. What happened with the death of Superman was that became a collectible, and everybody wanted to have one, which gave the comic industry an idea that what if we took every key issue of whether it's a death, a birth, a first appearance, or just a key issue, and we made an alternate cover, or we made a foil cover, or if we made one with a 3D card on the front. And this is where it got out of hand, because it made people think that, well, if I get a normal number 245 of Spider-Man, it's not going to be worth anything. But if I get issue 245 of Spider-Man with a foil cover, that's where it's going to be. That's where it's going to be in my collection. I'll hold on to it for a few years, and I'll be able to sell it down the road and make a profit on it. Well, the problem with that was, because the comic industry was going so big at that point, they made so many variant covers and so many foil covers and so many yada yada yadas that it oversaturated the market, and these became less and less valuable because everybody had them. Now, I know this very well because my mom's boyfriend at the time, he was very much a collector, and he liked to collect many different things. And when I was growing up, his big thing was comics. And he believed that if he went out and bought every special cover, every foil cover, every, shiny whatever cover, hologram cover, that he'd be able to hold on to them, sell them later, and make a profit. Well, even at the age I was at, which I would say I was probably 7, 8, the amount of times that we would go out and get these comics, even I at that point was kind of going, we keep getting comics, but you don't sell them. So where's the profit? And he would say, well, no, we're going to do it later. We're going to do it later. We're going to do it later. And there was a point where he was not living with us. He had his own place. And we would go over to his place, and he would have multiple long boxes. And for those who don't know what long boxes is, they're about yay big, which the camera kind of throws it. So let's say about 2 feet of just comics in boxes that were all specialty comics or foil comics or all these special covers. And like I said, even at that point, I was kind of going, wait, this isn't really, I don't see how this works. And it was later on that we found out that, well, he found out that it wasn't going to be making him a ton of money. They ended up breaking up after so many years, and he had left a couple of the boxes with me. So I have a couple boxes that are pretty much full of all these variant covers which with the comic boom that's going on now, or at least was, but probably not as much anymore, it's it could have been a profit, but it also I kind of just like having them. I wouldn't go out and purchase them myself, but just having them in my collection, I kind of enjoy it. But that was I know I've heard so many stories from back in the day where he was not the only one who was going out and buying these comics every day thinking that they would be the next death of Superman, which even now a death of I have a death of Superman which I picked up from Fan Expo Canada probably 5-6 years ago, and I think I paid cover value for it. I think I probably only paid $3 for it because everybody has it, and it just didn't get the value that it wanted. And I think that was part of the comics crash was everybody was buying these things thinking they'd be an investment in the future, and it just wasn't paying off. And a lot of stuff got bought, but then a lot of the interest just crashed after a certain amount of time because it wasn't worth it. But out of the 90s and all those variant covers and such grew a independent comic company based off a few people who are not too happy with the industry. And for those who know what I'm talking about, it's the guys that created this Spawn. That is Image Comics. Back in the 90s, you had the two big boys, which you still have today, and that's Marvel versus DC. And they had their pick of whoever they wanted. They had artists and writers going back and forth. Some wrote for DC. There wasn't a ton of exclusivity, if I remember correctly. But you had a bunch of artists at the time who would give up their rights to the characters and rights to their stories and their artwork, and they would give up those rights to a Marvel or a DC to get them published. And after a while, you had some of these artists and writers become almost pseudo celebrities based off how good their work was. And that was people like Todd McFarlane and Jim Lee and Rob Liefeld and all the others. And they started wanting their own, they wanted a little more cut from all of their work. And Marvel and DC were the first ones to stand up and say, no, that's not how we do things. That's you have what you have and you've signed over your rights. Well, a lot of them got together and said, well, let's maybe come up with our own company and sell them almost as an independent big company, let's call it. It's an odd way to say it, but they want to try and make it on their own. And Todd McFarlane, Jim Lee, Rob Liefeld, they all got together and they decided to build Image Comics, which was a daunting process, especially when you're going up against two companies that sort of held probably, I gotta assume, around 80% of the market share when it came to comics. Because back then it was hard, like the way it is now, you can make a comic and you could probably get it on a shelf pretty easy compared to what it was in the 90s, because it was a lot harder back then when you have those two juggernauts who could probably say we're the only ones that are going to be on your shelf. And it's a lot easier to get stuff done now, especially with things like the internet. But in 92 they built Image Comics and they came out with all of their own titles. So you had Spawn, obviously, from Todd McFarlane. You had the Wildcat series with that was I gotta read more Wildcats. I remember seeing Wildcats everywhere, and I read a little bit of it, and I became such a fan of Grifter. I've got to read more of it because I started to read Grifter later when Jim Lee took that character and brought him over to the Wildcats universe completely and took it over to DC. But that series was such a cool looking book and such cool looking characters. You got Savage Dragon, you've got a whole bunch of other ones that all these independent writers and artists were doing on their own, and they would take a cut. They would take all of the profit for themselves. And I don't think Marvel and DC was really ready for how well that did, because they made a freaking punch to their shelf and their bottom line on Marvel and DC. That Spawn #1 still is a monster of a book. That is the only Yes, I believe that is the only CGC book that I own, and that is issue 1 of Spawn. Yes, thank you, J.S. Bellinger. Youngblood was a good one too. You're right. That's another one. I need to read more Youngblood. But that Spawn book just took over because you had a character, and like I said for the beginning of the show, I believe it's still the best-selling African American lead character in a comic book, and the idea of Spawn being this war hero or mercenary, I guess he is, getting killed and coming back as this character who's drawn where you barely saw him was such a different way of drawing things compared to the way that Marvel and DC were doing at the time. And you can really see it when you watch the animated DVDs that came out in the animated series, because it was broken up into 3 sections. There was episode 1, episode 2, episode 3, and I believe they're about an hour and a half long, hour, 2 hours. Yeah. Anyways, the first one is drawn very much where you see Spawn in full. You see the reds, you see his full outfit, full cape, full everything. The second one, he's a little more in the shadows. The third one, he's basically in the shadows the whole show. And it definitely shows the way you can draw that character and keep him away from everybody and still have the impact of just seeing the black shadow with the green eyes and the smoke coming out, or seeing a chain shoot out of the shadows. Such a good animated show. You should definitely check it out. I think it's available no, I don't think it's available online. I have it on DVD. Buy physical media, folks, because if they take it off digital media, you can't find it anymore. DVDs were a good thing. But the whole Image idea, and the other thing that McFarlane did with Image that was so smart was they went, let's make toys. Let's not just have the medium of the book. Let's make toys, and let's make animated series, and let's make movies, and let's do things that Marvel's doing, but let's do them, be honest, better. The Spawn movie was not better. I will completely agree. I do like that movie though. It does have its perks where I think it's pretty funny. Michael Jai White is good. But with McFarlane, he just had this brain of, let's make this bigger than just a comic. And in the 90s, I remember watching the Spawn animated series and then going to a comic book store and seeing the first round of Spawn figures, and they look just like any other toy. But then that McFarlane brand happened that everyone knows now, and the level of detail just shot through the roof. And that made those toys collectibles, because you didn't want to give it to a kid because you knew a kid wouldn't appreciate how good that toy was. And it was such it was such a toy line for kids, but it also was such a toy line for adults, because they had toys that were a Spawn, that if your kid really likes Spawn, you can get a Spawn toy, or you can get a clown toy or something like that. But then they also had like the Twisted World of Alice in Wonderland, and they had horror movie characters and Rob Zombie characters and Alice Cooper with a guillotine. And I will never forget being a kid and seeing the Twisted World of Alice in Wonderland and seeing his twisted versions of all the characters, and having this big menacing lion which actually looked terrifying, and then you had the Scarecrow all broken and stuffing coming out of him, and then seeing Dorothy be like in dominatrix leather, and like all the munchkins were like sort of, I don't know, it was a very adult looking toy that I think you couldn't get away with now, but it worked so well for them, and they made so much money off those toys and so much money off those comics. So bravo for them to take their own work and say, we're going to do this on our own without anyone else. We don't need the two big wigs. We're going to do it ourselves. And they knocked out of the park. So bravo. And Todd McFarlane's Canadian, so gets a little extra on mine. But yeah, that 90s run of, and you can definitely see in the 90s when it came to the way even comics are drawn. And I think the Image guys had a lot to do with that, because if you look at an early 90s book and you look at a late 90s book, the art is very different. You had a book in the early 90s that was very flat, and you could tell there wasn't a lot of depth on the page. Like the background looked very much right against your main characters in the foreground. But once you got into that mid 90s, you really started to see a little bit of shadow and a little bit of depth. And by the end, it almost looked like a 3D photo. And that took the art form into a completely different realm once you hit the 2000s and you had a little bit of computer generated material into it. And everything started to go digital with the runs of like Ultimate X-Men, Ultimate Spider-Man, and stuff like that. So it was definitely a fun time to be a kid in the 90s and going to comic book stores and seeing big comics and big superheroes, and Rob Liefeld with big everything and really small feet. I don't know. I love Rob Liefeld. Rob, I know you're never going to watch this, but I really do love your art. But there are some choices that you made that I just kind of go, you really didn't think anybody would see that. You didn't like drawing feet. Nobody has good feet in any of your books. Again, great artist, love him. He created Deadpool, so I can't say anything bad about him, but guy just doesn't like drawing feet. I don't know why. Anyways, to sum all this up, the 90s were a great time in the world of comics, and without them, I don't think the world of Marvel, the MCU, the DCU, whatever is going on right now, we wouldn't have that if it didn't have the boom of the 90s comic book run. And the thing that brought me the most joy is something, where is it? This book is the reason that one of the reasons I'm a big comic fan. I was, let's see, this is August 96. So I was 8. And my mom had taken me, and we had gone down to Buffalo. We had a family member down in Buffalo, and we probably had seen this family member twice in my lifetime. So didn't have a relationship with her, was just going down because that's what we did. And my mom and I went to, I think it was a gas station, and she said, get a book or two from the magazine rack or something, and just so you can have it and take it with you, so you're not sitting there going, this is boring, this is boring, this is boring. And the two things I picked up were this and an issue of Spawn. And it was my first issue of Spawn. It was not issue 1. I believe it was like mid 40s issues, like 45 or something. But this book really just opened my eyes to the world of comics. And there are some images in this book that have stuck with me since then, and I will always have them ingrained in my head because I read this book 100 times probably. From just open, and this is the fun part. Just this, remember, I'm 8, and I'm at a relative's house, and you skim your finger across, and there's always a seam that, there's an insert or something that catches your finger, and that's what you open up. My finger slides across, and Lady Death is the first thing that catches my eye. As an 8-year-old boy, having Lady Death pop up gets your attention. It really does. And then realizing that the back cover is the crow and there's no photo or anything, it's just the image. And spawns in this. And, the Wolverine Batman combo from 95, 96. Like, this book is one of my favorite things that I will never ever get rid of because it honestly shaped me so much that I have probably 10 to 12 other Wizard magazines that I have grabbed throughout the years from, bookstores going out of business and selling them. That entire idea of a Wizard comic magazine that you could pick up and find anything you wanted in one location is such a cool idea. And I think it has the same effect as Blockbuster of we have the internet and we have Netflix and we have every other streaming service that exists now. But there's a little thing missing. And there was a little bit of a different feel when you would go to a Blockbuster or you would pick up a magazine like that. And it was all in one place. The internet and streaming service has made it easier to consume, but it's also taken a little bit of the personality out of it. And I know this is better. And I'm kind of the old fart of, I wish it was like the old days. I fully admit that that's the way I feel, but it was really cool to go into a bookstore or a gas station and pick up a copy of Wizard World and even Toy Fair. Like the Toy Fair was the toy version of Wizard, and just open it up and seeing all these cool things in one spot. It was definitely fun. And I wish we had a little bit of that still, but we don't. And that's fine. I can always go back and read that book and read all my other books. And it's definitely a nostalgia trip for me looking at old Wizard books. But that was the 90s. That was my version of the 90s. I know there's a lot more of the 90s. There's the Batman animated series and TV shows and blah blah blah. 100%. We will probably do another 90s month and another 90s episode to do with comics at some point. But the 90s were a great time. I wish we could go back and do a little bit of a DeLorean back to that fun time in the world of comics, but we can't. So we're going to kick back and enjoy what we had. Read your old comics. I've got a whole bunch of 90s books I could probably go through, which I actually might go through tonight or tomorrow and relive some great memories. Thank you all for joining tonight. It has been a blast. We got one more thing before we go, and that is our 3 questions. We have a little Q&A. Nose itchy. We got a little Q&A at the end. We've got a couple questions that have come in. We've got something about Funny Enough McFarlane. We've got a little bit of cosplay and a little bit of childhood questions. So let's start off with question 1. This was sent in by Dave Thorne, Fandom Frontier. Thank you for sending this in. If I could turn 3 characters from pop culture nerddom into a McFarlane toy, what would they be? I got this question from Dave a couple days ago, and I have been trying to come up with a good answer, and it is struggling me to come up with a good one. Because they have the DC line now, that takes out a lot of the DC guys because he's cranking out everybody at this point. I would love to see his version of the Marvel. And I know we want specific characters, but I would love to see him do the Marvel versions of the DC style. The DC line's incredible, but I think he could pull off the Marvel ones very well. And especially because we have so many more movies that he could take likenesses of and do versions of a Tom Holland Spider-Man, but also do an Andrew Garfield Spider-Man or do a Drax with Dave Bautista or something like that. I would love to see his take on the Marvel series. Another one that I would love to see him. And it's funny. It came up. I thought of this answer and then I saw a post where he's kind of doing it. I would love to see his version of the Looney Tunes. I say that because they just did a McFarlane toy announcement, and they're doing a couple characters from different fandoms, and one of them is actually Bugs Bunny. So when I saw that, I was like, hey, guys thinking just like me. I would love to see his version of the Looney Tunes. I think they've done some in the past, but I would love to see an actual line of all of the Looney Tunes. A Bugs, a Daffy, not a Space Jam one. I'm sorry, just don't do Space Jam. Just do traditional, and maybe do something with them. Do a Wile E. Coyote with an Acme anvil or something like that. I think that would be a really cool series that I think would sell really well. And to go off of that, I also would love to see McFarlane do an Animaniacs line. McFarlane, out of all of those, please figure out a way to do a line of Animaniacs toys, because they've now got 3 seasons of the new show, and from what I've heard, I've seen the first season, I haven't seen the second or third. It's incredible. And I think that fandom's coming back, and I think we have enough of a time from the original run that nostalgia has come back. I think it's a line of Animaniacs toys from the McFarlane guys would be a great choice. And I know they probably wouldn't go too deep, but having like a Buttons and Mindy, obviously you'll do a Pinky and the Brain, but doing some of those darker, or not darker, those more in-depth characters, even a Chicken Boo or something, would be such a cool thing to see in a toy. So those would be mine. Doing the Marvel guys, doing the Animaniacs guys, and doing the Looney Tunes, I think would be a great addition to the McFarlane lineup. All right, number 2. This was sent. I don't know who sent this in. I apologize greatly. I forgot to put your name down. What is the best adhesive to use for foam cosplay? First cosplay question. Great. So, for those who don't know, I cosplay. I'm a cosplayer. I've won a couple awards. Not to toot my own horn or anything. I'm not tooting my own horn. I've been cosplaying for off and on for 10 years. I've really kicked it up the past 4 or 5 years. When it comes to foam, anybody who's starting out, I always say, don't go nuts. Stick with stuff that's around your house, etc. Don't spend a ton of money on something you might not stick with. Hot glue always works. There is a little bit of a concern because certain materials, it does melt a little bit. Hot glue will work. The only worry is most conventions, if you're taking it to a convention or a photo shoot, is during the summer when it's a hot day. There is a possibility that you will lose the bond because it will get hot and it will liquefy again. So, crazy glue is definitely one. It comes, in various sizes. You can get the small stuff from the dollar store. You can get bigger ones. I'm using crazy glue a little more with some of my projects. I don't like using it because I'm kind of a slob and it gets on my fingers. And having dirt, glue, anything in my hands, it's sort of like nails on a chalkboard for me. So I don't use it as much as I probably should. But crazy glue will always work. Again, watch out because that stuff is exactly what it is. It will bond and it's a pain in the butt to get off. The thing I use the most, though, and I don't know if you can see it. There it is. That stuff right there. That is barge contact cement. It is used in building supplies. You can get, I can't remember what the Canadian version is, LePage. LePage is at Canadian Tire, Home Depot. Barge is I believe it's the American version. We got it up here because Michaels stocked it during the pandemic when they brought out their cosplay line. That was their adhesive of choice to sell. I have used LePage for the longest time. I bought the Barge because it went on clearance because they killed the line, which is I could get into a rant about why Michaels killed that line of products. Personally, though, I really like the barge. It's got a really good adhesive. Basically, what you do is you'd have two pieces of foam, wipe it on one, let it dry, wipe it on your other piece, let it dry. As soon as they touch, they will bond. And it works really, really well for most things, especially with foam. If you're building foam armor, that is perfect to bond. Watch out for things if you, this is going to look very suggestive on camera. If you have a tube and you need to put, say, a dowel in the tube, don't use it for that, because if you need to get the dowel in a certain amount, it will stick as soon as it touches. It won't go all the way in. So test it out, give it a shot. The page stuff works great. I personally like the barge, but if all you have is hot glue, use it. If all you've got is contact cement, use it. Any adhesive will work. Use what you feel comfortable with. Personally, it's barge cement, contact cement for me. Lastly, our final question is, what are your top 3 childhood movies? I love this question. Top 3 childhood movies. Well, I know it's an unpopular opinion with certain people. I don't think it's my generation. I think it's the older generation or the younger generation. I loved Space Jam. I absolutely love Space Jam. I remember seeing that in theaters, and it was a masterpiece as a kid. Um, it was such a masterpiece. If I remember correctly, I received 3, 4 copies of that movie on VHS for Christmas that year, because nobody in my family decided to communicate and ask who's buying what. So I think it was my dad bought it for me like a couple weeks before Christmas. It was just like we were out of the store and I saw it and I'm like, oh, Space Jam. And he's like, cool, I'll buy it for you. And then Christmas Day or birthday happened, and I opened up 2 bags, 3 bags, and they're all VHS copies of Space Jam, which everybody had to bring back. I think one of them was mom, so that went over probably really well with them. But yeah, Space, even now, I can put that childhood version of me on and just go, it's fun. It's a fun movie. Um, Another childhood movie. I Anybody who knows my wife and I, Beauty and the Beast is probably our favorite Disney movie. I've always liked that movie. I think it's one of the best Disney movies. I'm not a fan of the remake. I'm sorry. I'm I'm that guy. To be fair, I think a lot of people are like that based off all these new remakes of the old classics. That classic, the soundtrack's amazing, the animation's amazing. Seeing them walking and dancing in the big grand hall of the castle is just amazing. And yeah, it's a great movie. It's a great movie. All the characters are great. Um, Lion King and all those around the same time are great, but that one just holds a little special place in my heart. And it's my wife and I's movie, so that will always be a childhood favorite. Lastly, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, that first movie. I watched that recently. You know what? I can't even say like I don't watch it. I watch it probably once a year, if not once every other year. That was an incredible movie. That movie was just, it was so adult for a kids movie that it was right on the borderline of probably not good for kids, but it was also based off the original comic book, which was a lot darker than what the TV show was. So I would love to have been that one parent, and I doubt it was just one, who saw what the toy was and what the show was, and then took their kids to the movie thinking they're getting that, and they actually ended up getting the comic, and just like the jaw drop of what am I watching? But that movie was so good. And you've got a toy line like NECA, who I think has made every character from that movie, except I think for the police commissioner, because they are just pumping out versions of that toy versions of those characters where they released the turtles and then they did the babies and then they did April and then Splinter in the fire and Casey and Shredder and Splinter. Like they just went nuts and released everybody. And I would love to have all of them, but they cost so much money now that I think they're like $40 a piece now. And I can't afford to buy 500 of those, but they're amazing because that movie is amazing. The darkness of that movie, the adult version of a comic book and a cartoon that every kid loved at the time was just so good. And you know what? I'm going to go on record, and this is probably going to have everybody leave the channel. I like TMNT 3. I'm sorry. I know it's a bad movie. I know it's not the first one. I know it's even not the second one. But honestly, I love that movie. That was a darn good movie that I will always say gets a lot of hate that it really shouldn't. This will go into the last little bit of the show, and then I'll let you guys go. I know we've been going for an hour. That is one thing that I wish I could make. And I know somebody deep in the bowels of the internet has this file. I would love to get a file of the Time Scepter from TMNT 3 because that is a prop that I've always loved. And you can't find anywhere because the movie gets so much hate. But I would love to have one. So if someone can point me in that direction, DM me on Instagram or Facebook or whatever, or on here, because I would love to own one of those or make one of my own because I got a 3D printer now. But yeah, those would be my three. So we got Space Jam, we got Beauty and the Beast, and we got the first Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And it is 8:02 on a Monday night. And I think that is about it. We've covered all the news for the week. We had a thanks for the memories. We did the main event. We talked about 90s comics, and now we had our few questions. And I can't believe you guys are all here. Thank you all for watching this. It means a ton to me. It is a ton to me. Please like, share, subscribe. Even if you just press that share button, it tells YouTube that you're interested. You don't even have to share it with anybody. If you're that person who lives in their basement and says, I don't have any friends, who do I share this with? Just press the button. It helps. But anyways, thank you guys very much. Let me check my notes because I know we got another episode coming up next week. Right. Next week is 90s music. We're going to be talking about 90s music next week. I'm a grunge fan. I'm a metal fan. I'm a rock fan. But you know what I also like? I liked Spice Girls, and I still like Spice Girls, and Backstreet Boys, and Aqua, and 90s dance music. I have no problem admitting that I like all of those genres. We're going to be talking about all that stuff next week. We're going to be talking about probably another review that's coming up for a movie, because I'm probably going to be watching the movie this week. But thank you all for joining us. I'm going to let you guys get out of here. Thank you all for watching. My name is Myers Corp's Creation, and I can't wait to see you guys next week. We're going to be talking about 90s music next week. Thank you all. We'll see you next week. I'm Myers Corp Creation. See you later.